As many of us know and have experienced, churches are changing at a rapid rate. And with some of those changes, many pastors and ministers are going back to, or maybe even experimenting for the first time, the concept of bivocational ministry, which basically is like working a job and working as a pastor at the same time. So not a groundbreakingly new concept, but one that I hear about more and more often. And in today's episode, we get to talk with Manny Pollard, a pastor who has experienced bivocational ministry for many, many years of his pastoral life. And he's someone who I really think has just done it really, really well. Managed his family, his job, his time, the church, his studies, so many different things. And he's done it so well. So I'm really excited to get to talk to him and for him to share some of the things he's learned and some of the ways he has figured out over the years, how to manage the calling of the church with his family, with the other responsibilities that he has. So really excited to share this one with you. Listen in. Manny, good to see you.
Dude, great to see you too.
So today we're going to talk about something that is, near and dear to both our hearts, bivocational ministry, something that I think that you are amazing at. And I don't know if that's something you ever intended to be good at, but you are. You're a great pastor. You balance life in an amazing way. You have an amazing family. But would you just take a little time to share, what's brought you to this current place in your life and, what you're doing now and kind of what your experience has been in ministry?
Sure. Yeah. No, thank you. And I never planned for my ministry path to go this way either, really. So, I started young in ministry, right in my 20s. My wife and I, we were called to help plant a church, and we knew the best way for us to go about it was to, raise funds through working a other vocation, not raising support or necessarily jumping into making the church support us yet. We had plans to do that, but, kind of fell into this place where God provided it through different means. And part of that was being part of a workforce and part of a just a kind of a regular job. And that's kind of how we got into it. So we planted a church, did that bivocationally for almost 8 years, and then moved into full time for about 4 years. And then took on a new assignment for about a year and a half, and I did that full time. And then about a year and a half ago or so, I actually jumped into becoming bivocational again, doing ministry a different way, and kind of in a transition from figuring out what God has in store for us.
Perfect. What something you said kind of triggered something for me, but you've had a few different jobs as a bivocational minister. Do you have a sense or maybe a suggestion for those listening of kind of what is a good job, like a good industry to be in as a bivocational pastor? Like maybe what's your experience been there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all wish that we could just jump into a full-time job that provides, benefits and a good salary, but it doesn't always work that way. And so it was something that we had to decide, like, hey, we didn't want to put the financial burden on the church, and we're just going to trust what God wanted for us to do. And so I literally started out by working at a Starbucks, worked at in the back kitchen for a local restaurant. I did that for a little while, and then we kind of had a fun turn of events where I got hired to work in a software company. And it's not really saying, hey, go find a specific job, but for me, it was a really good fit that really complemented my giftings, things I was passionate about, and I was able to kind of work my way in there. But that was about a year or maybe even more into the kind of the first season of working in the church bivocationally that we finally landed in that job. And maybe a recommendation I have is, if someone's coming out of college or maybe coming out of a career, that they find something that they enjoy doing that actually is life-giving. For me, I was really fortunate that I really got to be a part of something special. I didn't get paid, handsomely or anything, but it was a really rewarding work that actually complemented me to be able to do the work that I was able to do with the church. I had the margin to really make a big investment. There was a little stint in there too where I actually worked for a school as a security guard, and that was really fun because it did allow for some downtime for me to plan, for me to be in communication with people throughout the day, and so that really worked for me and my style. But it's really about having a job that allows you to have margin to think about the church, to think about your place in leadership, and also to be in those relationships in whatever rhythm that looks like for you. So.
Yeah. Weren't you, when you were a security guard, wasn't that you were working as a youth minister at that time and you were being a security guard at a high school? Did you ever get to like invite kids from high school to come to youth?
Yeah, I was in a really fortunate position where a few of the kids had attended our church already, but I also, I had some opportunities to invite kids to certain things, or I'd actually lean into those students to be the inviters. That's obviously can be a sensitive, uh, place. It's not. My school is pretty welcoming in us, you know, sharing suggestions of where kids could attend and uh, participate in things like that. Uh, for me, it was a great opportunity though to just be a little bit more of an influence and help walk students through certain parts of life too.
Yeah, that's amazing. Did you could you describe like some of the unique challenges? I mean, as someone who's done both, what would you say are some of the unique challenges of being a bivocational minister versus a full-time minister? And we could probably talk about that for 6 hours, but what comes
Yeah,
to
you
mind?
you really could. I think some of the bigger challenges are finding margin to um, do the planning and work strategically. It wasn't so much the hands-on ministry that was challenging for me. It was more of, hey, when am I going to find the time to think about our attendance issues or problem solve some of the conflicts that might be going on and tensions that we would have as we experience growth, as we experienced some new strategic challenges, and also, to continue to fight for the margin to be present with my family. We were a pretty young family at the time. We had to fight really hard to kind of plan our weeks um, way ahead to even make sure that we would be available for the things that we needed to do. I think that the challenge for me personally was I wanted to say yes to everything, and I think if you've ever listened to any leadership podcast, that's the number one rule is to say, hey, don't say yes to everything.
That's right.
It's really true, and we had to be very selective. And so when it came to being bivocational, it was all about protecting the margin and really trying to think through, hey, what's going to already overlap in our life where we can also make this a ministry opportunity as well, not having to go fabricate more issues or problems. And you certainly had to go um, make some plans, maybe going to someone's house and doing some counseling. But if you're a pastor, those things don't really upset you. They get you excited and riled up to go counsel someone, pray over someone, work with them, and work through their issues. I think more and more though that you can always create those opportunities. So it was really being thoughtful um, about that. From the full time side, you know the you have a lot of freedom to do that. It's your 9 to 5 job. I think the challenge can be is that not everyone can meet you from 9 to 5, and so being able to um, really make yourself available outside of those working hours, be present with your family, also creates some different tensions as well that you're really trying to figure out what that looks like. And in churches, most churches have done a good job at navigating, saying, hey, it's not always 9 to 5, but we're going to have some flexibility here because you can't just punch out and punch in every day.
Yeah, you just made me think of something. I haven't thought about this for a while, but was this tell me if this was an experience you had, but when you're bivocational, one of the critiques or the questions people have for full-time ministers is just like literally like, well, what are you doing all day? Like, what do you do? You just meet with people and eat food all day, but when you're bivocational, there's just that doesn't seem to come up. So it seems like there's I hate to say it this way, but it almost seems like there's like a grace for a bivocational minister that people kind of implicitly have because it's like, oh, you're working a quote unquote real job. And then they see your ministry as this like this other offering that you're offering. Whereas in full time, there just doesn't seem to be that same grace. Like, did you experience that ever, or would you say that that's a thought you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely have unfortunately sat in leadership rooms, where, elders or board members might have that attitude. And I'm pretty quick to be defensive for our full-time pastors. They're needed. I didn't necessarily want to be bivocational. I always wanted to be full-time. It just seems that I have a certain gifting and skill set that allows me to do both. But yeah, I certainly have heard that. I've sensed that tension. I would say for a full-time pastor, they sense that tension of like, well, I got to go earn what I'm getting paid for. And then, yeah, there's a little bit of grace and extension of grace saying, oh, we don't want to bother you. You're working and, you're giving up so much, which is helpful. I like getting that pat on the back. But I think that you certainly can walk around with both stigmas, and it really is um, for me, it was no excuse to continue to work hard, even if I did have a full-time job. My wife, Kim, and we walked into this saying, hey, we want to be committed to the church, and we're going to be committed and kind of hold this mantle, if you will, with some seriousness, and also trust that God's grace is over that when we maybe overextend ourselves, and maybe when we're not extending ourselves enough. We know that we'd feel that. And I have to say that I was surrounded with some really great leaders for a good period of time that were very supportive of that balance. I think that's what made that special for us.
Yeah. Yeah, in your story and other stories, when you think about, you did get to go full time, and it was like, okay, amazing, I'm full time now. Can you remember, did you ever have a thought of like, what did you miss about being bivocational? And I asked that question for the person who may be listening who is maybe in a bivocational role who's thinking, oh, the grass is going to be greener if I could just be full time.
Yeah.
And, as we all know, there's pros and cons to any way you do anything, but especially in ministry, what would you say to that person, or what were your thoughts about like, oh, I'm full time now, and this is definitely more difficult than I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the way you said that you kind of have this illusion that, the grass is going to be greener on the other side. And, one practice that my wife and I had, when we were bivocational for about that 8-year stint of time, every year we would kind of do a kind of a heart check, an audit, if you will, of just saying, hey, do we think that God may be moving us to be in full time? Because it was always our plan. We had um, planted the church thinking that we'd be full time in a year, and we were just naive and dumb enough to think that would happen. And lo and behold, there was just a different path. But when we did go full time, a couple things, I didn't realize how many transitions and changes I would be going through when it came to leaving a place of work that I worked at for 6.5 years. A little bit over that I loved it. It was a fun time, but I also knew that that time was over and we were in a new season. For instance, we planted a church and started a church. We also grew a family. We went from 0 kids to 4 throughout that time. And so there were just some things where we were saying, hey, God, like, we don't think um, that we can really live and thrive by juggling both anymore. We kind of talk about, we can't serve 2 masters, and we felt like we were serving both and we weren't able to honor the work over the other. And so I think going back to that question, we really would admit that we thought it might be a little bit easier now that we had our full attention. And I say we, my wife and I, that we thought maybe, hey, once we get full time, like, we're going to be able to go and make this happen. To be honest, there was a lot more planning and a lot more strategy that had to go behind that than we were aware of, because we kind of had these built-in structures where, we were going to the office from 8 to 4 o'clock, and then we knew exactly what we were doing compared to being full time, and we were the ones that were in charge. And so there definitely is a certain level of pressure that you feel that where it changes. So if there's someone on here listening that's saying, hey, I'm thinking about going to become full time, really thinking through like, okay, what is the role that I play? If it's to take over leadership at a church, you're gonna experience that pressure. It's probably the right pressure. It allows you to lean into trusting God with more faith. But there are certain things where sometimes I was like, what did I just do? I actually had a pretty
That's
decent
right.
paycheck. I wasn't having to be held accountable at a different level, which are all things I really enjoyed. But I would just say those were the things that switched really quickly. One caveat to that I think might play a little bit differently for others is right after we moved to full time in 2019, 4 months later, we didn't know that COVID was going to happen. And so I had spent the first 3 months right after I had stepped out in the middle of the fall to be full time, kind of casting the vision for the next couple years. And then we rolled into that February, March timeframe, and that was all put on pause. And it was quite a challenge to navigate what should we do next as a church, what should we do as a leadership. So there's just some nuances where I think if I would have been full time in work, I could be like, hey, I'm sorry, I got work to do right now, and I could always fall back on that. And so it doesn't always make it was the right answer, but that seemed to be a good safety net for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, you just brought up a whole nother subject, leading through COVID. Could be
Yeah.
could be an
Oh,
entire series that we could have, 100 different people come on and talk through, like, what they learned and what was difficult. But yeah, that's an interesting time. So one of the I would say one of the things watching you and your wife I've always admired so much is you guys just have a divine capacity for ministry, like just a unbelievable and enviable capacity for ministry. So you have that, and I think that's probably a God-given gift that you guys have. But how do you coach or mentor others into kind of honoring their capacity and working in their capacity? And was there any like rhythms or any practices that you guys had that really helped you to stay focused and grounded and in the midst of all the things you could say yes to, as you already brought up, like
sure.
there's so many, but how did you stay grounded and how did you work in that capacity? Again, you guys have an incredible, I mean, 4 young kids, jobs, ministry, friends, relationships, so many different things. How did you guys kind of, I don't know, how did you guys honor that capacity and then stay true to each other and your family and grounded?
Yeah. Well, we definitely had a lot of trial and error in there. And I appreciate that. I definitely would say, yeah, that was uh, God's grace over us. And, I was reminded over time, starting to observe other pastors, friends of ours, people that were co-laborers with us, that we realized, yeah, I don't think that they either have the same capacity or just, may have a different approach. And that's not wrong. I think that was honestly something I had to wrestle with, not taking offense to that someone else wouldn't have as much margin or devote as much time to something, and not be offended by that. And I think, my wife, Kim, and I um, s- took a lot of time to understand kind of who we were. We took a lot of personality tests. Um, you know,
There you go.
we understood who we were through the Enneagram. We understood that we're, you know, I'm a flaming extrovert, and then there are other pastors I work alongside that were introverted that needed to fill their tank in different ways. And so we just kind of really need to understand what makes us tick and allow us to operate in those spaces. We set a goal to try to reach out to every family um, in our church every year, would either host them individually or within, a group of people. But we also knew that lined up with life, right? And so that's where we were able to really maximize that because how we knew we operated. We wanted to sit down across the table from almost anybody and everybody, and that allowed us to really thrive. There were certain things that we tried uh, that just really didn't make sense. We weren't going to spend a lot of time in the church building to do ministry. It kind of felt suffocating. At times, we actually didn't even have a building for the majority of it. But part of that approach was, I think, more of just understanding, who we were. And I will never forget the day. His name was Johnny, and he was an elder on our team, and we had dinner with them, and we probably had canceled dinner with them 4 or 5 times, and they finally were able to kind of get everything in order. And admittedly, there was somewhat of this level of shame, or like kind of saying, "Man, we can't hang with the level what you guys are doing, that wasn't a brag on us. He really was saying, how do you do that? And it was then that I discovered that I think every pastor, every person just has a different size plate. Everyone says my plate's too full. And, my buddy Johnny, he had a different size plate, and he needed to be okay with that. He had other responsibilities. It didn't mean that he wasn't contributing to the church. He contributed his gifts in totally different ways. And, would say that one of my gifts was I just had a bigger capacity, understanding the size of the plate that I had. And would be lying to you if I didn't say like, well, I felt like mine was just this huge, massive tray that you take out. And
Hey, I would say you do have a platter size plate.
sure, yeah, the platter.
It's a good.
But I also would say, I had to ask God, I was like, is that right? Is that okay? Through prayer and discernment and really seek counsel. And Johnny, really would also offer some things where I challenged him, say, do you really think your plate is this small? And it's okay if it is, but do you think it's just that, or are there things that you need to adjust to this kind of this bivocational life that he was trying to jump in as well? Because he had a certain level of authority, influence, and he felt the pressure of that. I wouldn't say that his plate got way more massive and turned into a platter, but once he saw that kind of analogy, if you will, illustration, I think it gave him an idea of like, okay, I'm comfortable with my plate going from a small kiddie plate to maybe just a medium-sized dinner plate that can actually handle certain things within that ministry scope. And for us, that's kind of the way we looked at it.
So that's a really helpful picture, I think, for people, is this idea of a plate, because that's something we can all kind of identify with. And, sometimes you're at Thanksgiving and you fill your plate too full, and then you're paying for it. You're like, oh no, I can't do that much stuffing. What was I thinking? But it's similar in a similar way, with our time, with our energy, and with our family and our ministries and our obligations. Like, that's a really helpful image. And I hope that people will consider that image, the image of a plate. And like you said, to honestly look at it, and to also be okay with, there are just seasons where you have less room on that plate to do the things you're doing. You could have, in some of the situations I'm thinking of, you could have, what happens if a family member becomes extremely ill? Well, that impacts your ability to serve others. What happens if, so many different things. What happens if a local pastor here had his house flood that I know? Like, he's got to take care of that. You can't just keep going. So then you have to look at that plate. And so that's a really, I don't know, that's a really good image to kind of what you're sharing there.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I would just say, when you think about what goes on your plate, you think about the priorities that you have. If you're working in ministry as a single person, there are plenty of more other priorities that come up, and that's a good thing. And for us, it was our children; they were a priority, but we also knew that they were part of this platter, if you will. And we said, hey, you're going to take up this much space, and if it needs to become bigger, we're good with that. But we're going to trust that we have room for more. And yeah, like you said, there are times where we tested the capacity of that, and we say, yeah, I'm not doing that again. Or next time we go around this way, I'm going to approach it a little bit different.
That's right. So yeah, that's so true. So switching gears just a tiny bit, I'm sure you have some of these conversations too, but I've just been hearing so many people talk about shrinking church budgets. So church budgets are shrinking. And what that's doing is that's putting pressure on the models that we've had for a long time, which I think, right, wrong, or indifferent. I think it's probably a good thing personally that we question what we're doing and consider we know what God has. But with that said, there's a lot of people who would say, and I've heard a lot of people talk about, that we are moving back to a bivocational model, like back to a tent making model, if you will, where the traditional idea of a full-time pastoral position, like those are becoming less and less, and people are having to consider how to make this model work. So when I say that to you, not only what are your thoughts about that, but also how would you encourage people? You've already brought up some good points, margin, capacity, different ways to think about being bivocational. But if we really are truly moving back to this model, then what are some good encouraging thoughts about the model, and what are the positives of being bivocational? So I just asked you a ton of things, but what are your
Sure.
thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, through this time, over 20 years of ministry, I've just learned that there are different expressions and philosophies and approaches to how the local church operates, and that's by God's design. And there are, there's the saying, different strokes for different folks, and you're gonna find some that feel that it needs to be healthily funded and gonna go above and beyond in making sure that resources are there, and that is awesome. But for some, expressions of the church, they're not going to get there. And that's not to, you know, say anything bad about that. Quite honestly, the church that we had come from, we looked at budgeting quite a bit different. And there are some things where I say, hey, I wish we would have invested in more staff to help support the mission and help push that forward, which is really just has to do with the Great Commission. How are we going to, go and make disciples through all nations, right? And we did that, but we just did it a little bit differently, with a little different approach. I get excited for that bivocational model only because it means that more pastors are going to be out there pastoring in the authority in the name of Jesus. One thing I've been thinking about recently is we have the church that I am at currently as a volunteer. We have amazing volunteers that man just knock my socks off when it comes to their capacity, when it comes to their willingness, and they operate in a way as a bivocational leader. The one caveat to that is they're not really released to go do all those kingdom things sometimes. And so it gets me excited when someone maybe stepping up to the challenge to say, I know that I'm called to go and carry that authority a little bit more. And I would just encourage or say that if you feel like you're being drawn in that direction, it may not be forever. There are plenty of pastors I know that did this for a time, and they handed off their ministry because they planted something, or that they handed off where they got to a certain point. That is all part of the bivocational model. I went into it thinking that I would be part of the church we were at for life, and that actually is not what happened. And that was a little confusing, but at the same time, a lot of good things happened through that. A lot of kingdom stories, exciting things, life change happened for the better. And I know that was part of God's plan. And so I think that as we look at kind of the landscape of the local church across America, yes, you're going to see more of a micro church, bivocational approach, which, has got to be a move of God, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's not moving in these larger churches or more traditional models. I just think that there's more accessibility and more innovation that's happening that allows for men and women to go and carry out their calling. As it says in Ephesians 4:11-12, equipping the saints for the work of the ministry, right? So that we can continue to equip more people. We're all in a way ministering, but it's really taking that place of the authority that God has placed on us to do his kingdom work. So,
Yeah, there you go. I've talked to several people, even here through the podcast and other places, just about their calling, shifting, and sometimes it's full time, sometimes it's in the marketplace, sometimes it's, but that calling remains the same, right? Like you were gifted as a pastor. And how have you seen, even when you're working at Starbucks, like how did that play out for you? Did you find yourself still even becoming shepherdly around the people you were working side by side with? Like, how have you experienced that?
yeah, no, I mean, absolutely saw it as a cool opportunity to kind of double dip into one, saying, hey, this job is providing a means for us to continue to carry out the church, our responsibility in the church, but also to kind of be in places where people that are unreached were. I've worked with a lot of coworkers over my time They didn't understand what the Bible was. They definitely didn't respond great when they heard that I was a pastor at a church. But being able to be present for years on end for part of that time definitely allowed me to have the rapport, that I think they were hoping to see, or even if I didn't know it, did see over time, and again, we're all called um, to be that light and to be that hope, no matter where we are in those settings. And so there are some advantages as well. I think that there are some ways that you can actually put too much pressure on yourself as a pastor to say, well, I'm here, I must go change these lives too. I think it's more about just, hey, being genuine about who you are in these spaces. Um, also making sure that you don't over prioritize um, the things at this workplace that's helping provide for you to, carry out that calling as a bivocational pastor. But I do think that can play hand in hand. I just would say it's for the kind of the slow game, if you will, with those that you co-labor with in work, than necessarily saying, hey, you're supposed to come with me to church, and the next day they're, giving their life to Jesus. I just don't think it works that way, nor does it have to be like that. More about being, the presence of God, because you are a Christian, you are living a holy life, so people can see that in everyday life, everyday work.
Have you thought about this ever? What would be your bivocational dream job?
Oh man. Well, I've I definitely have thought about it. It sounds kind of lame, but I had an amazing job. I worked as a software sales guy for a company that was a faith-based organization, but it was for profit. Um, you know, really for me, the dream job would be working for an organization that has values in certain priorities that I have. So making sure that, you're able to be present there for your family, able to be present for things outside of just the 9 to 5 clocking in, clocking out. Um, I am actually right now in kind of a stint of coaching. And would say that it has really scratched an itch that I didn't even know I had. And so that there got to be something in line with coaching and executive leadership, just helping develop people, because you're having conversations with people day in and day out, and having a little fun, And so I'd say that it's got to be in that realm of just interaction with others. But being a coach has been an amazing honor and privilege. And I do that from a volunteer standpoint, but it's been pretty hefty volunteer standpoint for sure.
And to clarify, to clarify what kind of coach you are. I think
I hope coach a baseball team in Division III collegiate level, and I basically am the assistant coach, but oversee operations and player development. So anything on or off the field when it comes to leadership development or player development and how they're doing as an athlete. That's my role and responsibility to make sure that they are being supported in any way possible to excel and thrive in that baseball environment and part of that program.
What's so funny and beautiful about what you're doing is, I mean, I think a lot of people would say that being a pastor is very similar to coaching in some ways. And here you are saying that you're double dipping or a bivocational role as a baseball coach really scratches the itch as a gifted pastor. And I think there's something to that. Like, maybe we overcomplicate so much of this stuff in our life. And maybe it is just like going like, oh, what jobs look like pastor work? And maybe I should do that. Like being a teacher, being a coach, being a financial advisor. There's so many different things you could do. Like
Right.
maybe we're just thinking too hard and like maybe we're overthinking these things. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, and to go back to kind of, the having margin, I think just having a full, if you work full time or part time, there are just parameters that are created for you where if you only have a chunk of 2 hours a day to think freely, and to be praying and to be ministering with people in, let's just say in the church context, you do get like a lot done. You have to. You don't really think about like, well, I'll just get at it. And that's probably more my personality. There's some procrastinator in me. I'm not going to put myself in too much trouble, but I think it's just more of, hey, if I can put it off the next day, I might, and so I think there's some advantage when you have your other vocation has forced you to have a little bit of structure, especially if you have um, certain needs outside of work and within your home or other priorities. Uh, and that helped us, at the church that we were at for 12 years was that um, all the leadership had, full-time jobs, and some of them had more flexibility than others. And we didn't compare each other's plates to each other. We just said, hey, my plate's not as full. Let me jump in with you there. Hey, your plate is a little bit smaller right now. It seems like you're a little exhausted. Like, let me help you. So that really helped us in that.
Yeah. Yeah, having good, honest, communication with others on the team. So, last couple of questions for you. The first one being, again, going back to your relationship with your wife and your family structure. You guys, again, super enviable, very admirable how you guys work together. How important do you think that spouse relationship is as you minister? And obviously, having common goals, common thinking, common drivers is obviously important. But is there any advice you could give or any encouragement you could give to others who are thinking that through, and maybe some conversations they could have with their spouse about these things that could help save them some heartache or some future dilemmas, if you will?
Yeah. Oh man, absolutely. One point of encouragement is, not every marriage, every pastor and their wife or spouse, um, not every relationship and how they execute ministry is going to look the same. And that's a good thing. For instance, my wife is a workhorse, and so I was just fortunate to have her be the one that took on certain tasks that I didn't want to do, or I just knew she would do better. And that's not always the case. I would say more that if you feel the call to be in ministry and your spouse um, gives you the okay and understands what they're signing up for is the most important thing. Taking time to be in prayer with you, prayer together in a certain level of partnership. Um, Ours was a little bit more engaged, a little bit more of a commitment from both of us, but I don't know if it has to be that way. And for instance, my wife Kim has now taken a different seat in how she carries out ministry. She has more of a marketplace ministry from her job, and also she volunteer coaches at the college that I work at as well. And we just support each other in that, understanding that it comes at a cost, but just good communication. So if a few things that you could do is, have a weekly conversation, have coffee, at your house, or if time allows, go out for a little bit and be intentional in that time. Not just to get lovey-dovey, although that's super necessary. It's more of like, hey, let's just talk and make sure we're on the same page. I have this elder meeting that's coming up. It's going to be a doozy, and it's going to be a long one, just so you know. Like that, those communication points help. It doesn't help if you're getting a text message, at 9 o'clock at night, and be like, hey, when do you think you're going to be done? That can create a unnecessary tension. So kind of pouring out some expectation can be helpful. But we had some rocky times as we had kids and we're kind of transitioning new seasons of life. I'll never forget one time my wife and I were out on a date out of nowhere. She just says, "Hey, I just feel like you're prioritizing this church over our family, and I'm not sure how I feel about it." That kind of came out of left field for me. My assignment was a little offended, but she wasn't wrong. And it wasn't so much that it was too far gone. She was just expressing, yeah, this is a concern that I have, that you're going to keep saying yes to these things and we're going to be regretting it. And so it really is important to be in some communication. Also challenge, though. It doesn't mean that you put things by the wayside. There are challenges, there are hard things that you have to do as a pastor, as a family, that does call for some sacrifice. And that's where you really lean into God's grace and to things that might be overwhelming, that it's going to be sufficient for you in that time, and you have to lead that as a leader of your household, and stand by that. And there are always seasons in the church where it kind of is all hands on deck. And we had a few of those in our lives through pastoral transitions and changes. And we just knew that, hey, we can do this. And we'd always say, like, how long are we going to put up with this? We would say,
That's right.
we can handle this for a couple more months, don't you think? And we just have that dialogue to say, okay, well, in a couple months, we know that this needs to change. And God was always faithful to usually finish it before that, but we always just kind of, um, over delivering what that looked like. And that really helped us. And again, we worked really hard on our marriage, sought counsel almost monthly, went on dates as often as we could. We were fortunate enough to have grandparents in the area at the time. So that's another thing too. You got to think through, what kind of support system do we have? If we're going into ministry in a new place, what does that look like? Again, nothing you can't overcome, but something to really think about, to think through, hey, if we're moving to a brand new community and we don't really have that support system, what does that look like for us? And who's going to really have to take one for the team when someone's at a meeting overnight or something like that? So those were the conversations that were had, and they're had often, but we're making sure we're good on the same page. And that was the other thing I loved about my leadership team. There was a time where I just could not make it to the meeting. I had called one of our elders who was more kind of the head of our board. We didn't really have that title, but just said, hey, man, I really don't think I can make it tonight. There's just a lot going on, and had their full support. And they understood, we just trusted each other a lot. We had a high level of trust that we weren't going to skip out on something so I could go watch a game or something. It was going to be meaningful.
That's right.
And that was really helpful too.
Yep. Yeah, you said something that I think is a good word, is that if you're married, it would never, I don't even know how to say this, but if you're married, it's not like God's going to call one of you to ministry.
Mhm.
It's a we thing. Like, we're called to ministry, and if you can't, it's just so impossible to do if one of you is operating like, oh no, I'm the called one, and the other spouse, my partner, is not. Like, that just doesn't work. And you'd probably agree, like, seeing people try to do that, it just doesn't work that way. And that goes back to the plate analogy. You gotta be really honest about what your family plate can accommodate. Which can be hard. It can be hard to say, hard to admit that, yeah, I don't think my plate can accommodate this right now.
Sure.
And that kind of has to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And God is kind. There are certain things that naturally grow the way you think. When your kids grow up, you start to grow up and learn too. There are certain things that, fall by the wayside, and new problems arise that you don't really know. And so seeking wisdom from other, more experienced veteran pastors is never a bad thing either. So, if you, are able to, surround yourself with men and women pastors that can really support you and this journey, maybe even giving insight, or even just kind of a place where you can share some of those tensions that they want to lighten the load. I've never had a pastor that's come to me, share a burden that's been on their heart, and I've never been like, dude, get away from me. No, I've been like, dude, let me know how I can help you. Let's brainstorm this out together, and it's been a beautiful thing. And I'm thankful for that. I've been able to get that support as well.
Yep. Yep. So good. Well, as we wrap up, I'm just curious. So again, this is my opinion of you, but I think you've done bivocational work so well. You have such good rhythms. I think you're an incredibly gifted pastor. But as others may be considering being bivocational, I'm curious if you could just leave us with some encouragement. What would be, if I was coming to you and I was saying, Manny, I am thinking about being a bivocational minister. Never done it before, but I'm considering it. How would you encourage me, or what would you say? What would you tell me to be thinking about and considering?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I would never discourage anyone that feels that press on their heart to not keep digging into it. But I would also encourage them and maybe challenge them to really make sure, and not to put fear in them, but to just say, hey, you want to be able to walk away, and know that God said, well done, good and faithful servant. And it's not about, the scorecard or, you know, elevated attendance, but it's more saying, are you going to be able to go in there and shepherd and care for people the way that God is calling you to? And if you can't, maybe just asking, well, why can't I do that? And it's not a bad thing, but being ready for a road of challenge and just a certain level of commitment. And this is a lower scripture, how pastors will be rewarded with a double portion. Part of it is it's because that call is a pretty weighty one. And so I would encourage them to say, well, what do your good friends think? Is there someone in your life that you admire, that you would respect their opinion? What does someone like your wife think about this, and what level of commitment are they willing to put into it? What do you have a vision of what that looks like for you? I mean, obviously, I entered in through a church planting experience, but there are plenty of other opportunities where bivocational pastors are transitioning and taking someone else's place, or taking on different roles, and so those all can apply. But it's saying, what level of commitment am I able to give to this, and am I going to be able to look at the Lord and say, yeah, I know this is what He called me to, and for me, there is a certain level of mystery. Just saying, like, I don't know why I get so pumped up thinking about the church. I mean, I've had my bumps and bruises in ministry over the last 2 decades. I love Jesus' church. I love the local church, and I would pray the same for them. I would say, I hope that you can walk out of that church better than you did when you came in. And that could be scary for people sometimes, because they hear a bunch of war stories, and they exist. Don't ignore those either. But if God is with you, He's going to continue to be. I would also encourage them to get into a network of pastors and friends as soon as they can, because it is a lonely road. It can be, but you're not as alone as much as you think, but it can feel lonely, because when you jump into ministry, no matter bivocationally or full time, there's just a certain level of loneliness that creeps in, and sometimes that's in your own mind, sometimes that's the reality, but sometimes it's really saying, who's the one that sent you? Because if it's a church planting organization that sent you, and it wasn't Jesus through that church planting organization, then we're in trouble, right? So those are the questions I'd have, is saying, like, who did you hear that from, and why do you think that's important?
Yep, that's so good, so good. And if someone's listening, where are you guys attending now? You?
Sure. We attend Prairie Lakes Church at one of their campuses. They're out of Cedar Falls, Iowa. And so we attend there, and, we love to faithfully serve, and serve in lots of different capacities, along with some of the other marketplace ministries that we're in right now, hoping, to reach more people. But that's where we're at.
That's cool. Yeah, so you heard it. If you are in Iowa and you happen to be at Prairie Lakes, look up Manny and his wife. They're amazing people. And if you're thinking about being bivocational, thanks for listening. And Manny and I would agree, like, man, what a amazing call and journey. So pray that you be blessed, and wherever the journey takes you, right? It's a wild one when you get in line with what God's doing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Manny. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another pastor or ministry leader who you think might benefit from this conversation. And if you're looking for more tools and resources to help you preach and lead with confidence, be sure to check out sermoncentral.com/podcast. Sermon Central is the largest online resource hub for pastors and ministry leaders. From illustrations to outlines to media, you'll find everything you need to preach and lead effectively. So check out sermoncentral.com/podcast, where you'll even find a special podcast listener discount on our membership pricing. Check it out and stay tuned for our next episode.